Hello, and welcome to Python, the Basics. All right, now it's time to dive into Python, like we mentioned in the last video. And in doing so, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of split this up into two different videos. So one that you can get some specifics about the syntax and so on that we're going to talk about in this particular video. And then what we'll do is we'll have a video that just kind of applies it all to a program. All right? And so let's kind of walk through it. And again, then what we'll do is we'll go through and actually show you how to do this in another video. And maybe you could have the PowerPoint of this video handy as we kind of do that. All right, so for this particular video, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the Python syntax, comments in Python, how to comment in Python, I should say, how to declare variables in Python, functions in Python, showing output in Python, getting basic input in Python, numbers in Python, casting in Python, and operators in Python. A lot of stuff here, but hopefully nothing that's too new to you, because in any other language, you would add comments, you would declare variables, you would actually execute functions, you would somehow display your output, get your input, and we deal with then data types when it talks about numbers and casting, and then finally operators, adding, subtracting, those types of things you've done in other languages also. So we're just going to talk about how to do it in this language as we get started very simply here. All right, so the Python syntax. Python is an interpretive language. We talked about that already. This means that as a developer, you write Python files. That'd be a .py extension in a text editor, and then put those files into the Python interpreter to be executed. It's just that simple. So as long as Python is on your machine, that's what you will do. Where in other languages, the indentation in code is for readability only, in Python, the indentation is very important. So you'll notice white spacing. We call it white spacing in programs. In most languages, white spacing means nothing. In Python, it means a lot. However, for this week, it's not going to mean anything because we're not going to really get into indentions and so on. That will come when we get into the conditional statement, if then else's type stuff, and loops. Instead of using curly brackets and so on, you actually indent what you want to loop or what you want to have as part of the true or false of a condition. Does that make sense? So we'll see that next week. But for the most part, the syntax is pretty simple. You're going to be blown away on how simplistic this language actually is. To get started from the first things we should know about is a comment. Obviously, in any kind of programming language, especially those in a professional environment, you want to comment your code and let people know what you're doing. It just helps out with the readability and maintainability of the program. And so Python has commenting capability for the purpose of encode documentation. Comments start with a hashtag or a pound sign based upon what age you are. Prior to Twitter, it was always a pound sign. Now, for some reason, it's a hashtag. And Python will render the rest of the line as a comment, meaning it will not execute that line. So if you put a pound sign in front of it, that will be a comment. So an example right there, hashtag, this is a comment. That will be a piece of code that will not be interpreted or executed. Make sense? Declaring a variable in Python. Well, you know what a variable is. So a variable is a temporary space in memory, RAM if you will, that will hold a value throughout the life of a program, okay? Just like any language or the ones you've already learned in other languages, variables are very important to understand and deal with. In Python, it's a lot more simple and it's a lot more straightforward and it's a lot more, what can you say? I'm going to say simple again for repetitiveness. It's a very easy thing to do. In some cases, I like it. In some cases, I don't like it. We can kind of talk about that here for a second. So unlike other programming languages, Python has no command for declaring a variable. Simply what you do, the variable is created the moment you first assign a value to it. So if you go down and you look at x equals 5, basically what happens is in Python, once that line is executed, x equals 5, if x was not created yet or declared yet, it will create a space for that. Does that make sense? That's all you do. In Python, the variable will take on the data type based on the value you assign to it. We're going to talk about more on this later because we can get more specific if we need to. But in this case, x equals 5, that x will be an integer. If we put double quotes around it, as you see there, this is going to be a string. Does that make sense? So John Y will be a string, X is that. Does that make sense? Now, as a professional programmers, we want to use proper naming conventions. We might as well get started with that right now. Like our other courses, we will continue to use the Hungarian notation. Again, naming conventions is that, something to actually be able to, a consistency about how we name things. Based upon where you work at or you go get a job at, that the naming conventions could be totally different than Hungarian notation. Here at Cincinnati State, we're trying to be very consistent with that, and we'll continue to use Hungarian notation. You may hate it. That's not really the point of it. But right now, the consistency makes it easier for you to be consistent. It makes it easier for your instructors to be consistent also. So in this case here, instead of X and Y, we're going to use int first number. So int as an integer equals 5, and str first name equals John. Does that make sense? So when you start writing your programs, please name your variables correctly. And I provided in the course the naming standards, coding standards. You'll find that in your course that to help you determine how to go about naming your variables. But in this case, int lowercase, that's the Hungarian notation for an integer. Do not abbreviate the name. Sit back and spell it out. First number. So in this case here, first being the one word, number being the second. Capitalize those first letters in each one of those words. Does that make sense? Very easy to read. Takes you all but a second to name them that way. And then it's a lot easier on you later on. It's a lot easier on me also to look at your code and anybody else who comes up looking at your code later on. Naming things X and Y makes it very difficult. And I can contest that it makes it difficult on you because later on you're going to forget what X and Y were. Spell it out and you'll save yourself some time. Functions in Python. You should know by now that a function is a set of code, right? It's a block of code that is basically written in a reusable code that can be used for a single related action. It can return a value, all right? Functions provide better modularity for your application and a high degree of code reusing. The reason I'm bringing it up here and now, yes, we'll be writing our own functions as you've done already, but we're also going to be calling functions that are part of a big Python library. When you downloaded Python onto your machines, or your machines already has Python, that library is already contained there. And so these are like intrinsic functions that you're going to be using and calling. It makes our program run that much easier. We're going to be introduced to a couple of them in this video, so I just want to make sure that you understand what a function is. The ones that we're going to be looking at in this video is print, input, and type. These are all functions. As you see, print with the 2 brackets, input with the 2 brackets, and type with the 2 brackets. It's sort of interesting how those are very similar, how you name those with those brackets, I should say, as the functions you may have used in Visual Basic in previous classes, or functions you use in any other language for that matter. So it's pretty consistent. All right. Showing output in Python. Well, it's pretty simple. What you're going to discover, what we're going to get into now, is our Python program is not going to be tied to a GUI right away, okay? Our Python program is going to be tied to a command prompt or yeah, I would say it that way, almost like a command prompt type of piece. So what we're going to do is display these things out there. We're not going to throw them back out there onto a GUI with controls. So in Python, we really don't do that unless we specify we want to do this. To start this course, we will not. We're just going to use print, and then we'll just print it right back out to the command prompt. And you'll see what I mean in the following video. So the simplest way to show output is to use the print. And so in this case here, you can say print, open bracket, hello world. Again, print's a function. See that right there? It's a function. So in this case, print, hello world being a string. You can also say print of a variable, and it will print the contents of that variable. You can pass 0 or more expressions and separate them by a comma. So if you remember how we did a string or so in VB, we kind of use concatenation symbols. In this case here, all we need to do is separate by a comma. So the total is, I have a space after that S, if you can see that, comma, DBL total price. If I did that and the total price was $100, it would say DBL total is 100. Make sense? Pretty simple? I think so. Getting basic input in Python. Once again, what we're going to do is we're going to ask the users to supply input. Once again, I'll give you an example of that as we get started here in the next video. In this case here, we're not pulling it off a GUI. We're literally going to ask the user for input. So the input function first takes the input from the user and then evaluates the expression, which means Python automatically identifies whether the user entered a string or a number. It will know right off the bat. So what basically we're going to do is the input, enter your first name. Whatever they enter will go then into the variable str name in this situation. You can ask them to enter a number. You can ask them to enter all kinds of things. But for the most part, that's what we're doing. Does that make sense? So input, enter your first name, and that will go into the actual variable. Now, if you introduce this variable right at this point in time, str name, it will then be declared, meaning memory will be held, and it will be held based upon it being a string. Make sense? Hopefully I'm explaining this well. Numbers in Python. Well, as we talked about before, if you just add a number to your variable, it's going to be, it'll take on that type of data type. There's three types of numbers in Python. There's an int, integer, float, which is a decimal, and a complex, which is not used much, and we'll discuss it maybe later in the course. You're not going to use it all that much. It's for very high-level mathematic formulas. For the most part, then, for what we're going to accomplish in this course and what you're going to accomplish in Python for the probably 98% of the time, integer and float will be the numbers you will actually use. Again, there's no such thing as decimal like you may have had in other languages. In this case, it's float. That will be our decimal that we actually deal with. So integer is a whole number, positive or negative, without decimals of unlimited length. Float, or a floating point number, is a number, positive or negative, containing one or more decimals. That's how it works. Okay? So we'll use float for just about everything we're dealing with decimals, like money and so on in that case. Variables and numeric types are created when you assign a value to them. I mentioned that before. So in this case here, int value equals 5 and dbl value equals 2.5. I want you to note something really fast here, no big deal, but we use Hungarian notation for names for variables. For float, we'll just go ahead and use a notation for double, what we've used before, okay, in other languages. So dbl will be our float Hungarian notation for that, okay? So dbl double, I should say, will be our Hungarian notation for float. You got that? So name all your floats dbl, and we should be fine. All right, cool. To verify the type of number in Python, you can use the type function. So what type does is that if for some strange reason in your program you want to know what type is actually in that particular variable, you can type in type and put the variable name in there. As you see afterwards, I have print type and the variable in there. I might be missing a parenthesis. I think I am in that. I apologize. So there should be a parenthesis after, there should be a second parenthesis after dbl value. What will come back is it will actually tell you what's in there, either a float or an integer or so on. Why would you need this? Maybe for debugging purposes and so on. So not everyone's, very rarely would you use this, but you can use this if you want to know the data type that's actually within the variable at any point in time. All right, just use that function called type. Casting. There may be times when you want to specify a type onto a variable. This can be done with casting. One of the things we talk about as programmers is this. We can let the program deal with the data type based upon what we give it. That's called implicit declaration or implicit casting, if you will. If we as programmers want to take complete control of what's going on, we want to make sure the data type that's in a particular variable is exactly what we want. We call that explicit casting. And so you can either let the computer figure it out, or you can tell it exactly what you want to do. Okay, and so by putting these type of casting, if you will, functions in place, you can tell it exactly what the data type is supposed to be, and we don't have to guess. You wouldn't have to use that type variable later on. You tell it exactly what's going on. So to do that, you could put int, constructs an integer number from an integer literal, a float literal, and so on. It will round it and so on as soon as you put int around it. Float constructs a float number from an integer literal, a float literal, or a string literal, providing the string represents a float or integer. Same thing for integer there. And a string constructs a string from a wide variety of data types, strings, integers, and floats, and so on. So what we're basically saying here is that these are, what you would do is you could put int, I don't know if I have an example here. Yes, I do. Here we go. So casting in Python. So in this case here, int1, x will be 1. int 2.8, as you see here, y will be 2 because it literally truncates the .8. It does not round. int with a string of 3, it will become 3. Float, as you can, I won't read these to you, but you can walk down these and actually see how these would work with 1, 2.8, 3, and 4.2. Same thing with strings all the way through. Does that make sense? So now what we're doing is based upon what our input is and based upon how we want our input to be, and we want this to be an integer even if they give us a string, this will ensure that that happens. So that could be interesting. So, you know, it's based upon where your data is coming from, how you're getting the data. You don't want Python to interpret that incorrectly. So if you put a casting on it, a casting function on it, it's explicitly casted the way you want it as a programmer. So in other words, I'm highly recommending that you use this all the time. Cast your numbers so you ensure what's in there. You won't ever run into any kind of runtime errors. Does that make sense? Operators. Operators are used to perform operations on variables and values. Python divides the operators into the following groups: arithmetic, assignment, comparison, logical, identity, membership, and bitwise. For the most part, these are the same type of operators as you've seen already in previous languages, and very similar to other languages, especially that are derived from C, like Java, C# possibly, PHP, and so on. Okay? For a list of these, we'll go to W3 Schools. I didn't want to list them all in this particular video because they get kind of long. So let's go ahead and do that at this point in time. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on this, and you can do the same thing if you like. And that worked just perfectly, didn't it? And so at W3 Schools, which is a resource we will use quite a bit in this class because it just reads so well and it's so simple. This is one of many we're going to use in lieu of a book. Has everything. So here's your operators here. And as you see, we'll walk through the Python arithmetic operators. Addition, that's a plus sign. Hey, that's something wild in it all the way through. Minus, multiplication, division, modulus, right? Modulus returns the remainder. Exponents is 2 stars. Floor division. It's the Python assignment operators are equals, plus equals. We'll talk about that as we kind of get into that. So you want to add something. So in this case here, x plus equals 3 is the same as x equals x plus 3. Plus equals, minus equals. All languages, for the most part, as I know of, pretty much use the same type of notation. So you can kind of look at these, try them all out if you like, to get to know these a little bit better, okay? Kind of go look at them. They all have the tried here, which is really, really good. If we sit back and we want to know, this is actually exponents right here. If I wanted to try it, you can actually see that x equals 5, x is the exponent of x exponent 3, so 5 times 5 times 5, right? 125. That's exactly what it is. So there you go. Kind of neat. So try those out. If you're unsure of those, please use this resource right here, and you can try each one. There's the equals. One thing you might want to make sure you understand in this language as compared to maybe VB, you don't set something, if you're asking a question when we get to the if conditions, we'll talk about this at that point in time. You say if x equals y, that will not work. X will then be assigned to y. If you're comparing the two x and y's, you want to sit back and say equals equals. Many languages derived from C do that, okay? VB does not do that, but every other language that you'll see out there does that. So you'll get used to that quite a bit. And we'll talk about this more when we get into conditions and so on, probably in the coming weeks, okay? Logical operators and or, they're all sitting here right here. And again, this is a great resource because you can try each one to make sure you understand how they all work. Okay, W3 schools. Please use this. Please try them all. Make sure you understand how each one of these works. I highly recommend you try it. It just works really nice for you. It takes you right to a screen. You see the code over here, and you see the result. You can't ask for more than that, and you should be able to apply it very easily to your assignments and projects. All right, cool. Let's go back to here, okay, and there. Okay, so that's pretty much it. That's it for this week to get started. Again, what we'll do is the next video, we'll kind of write a program and apply some of these things. Hopefully, this wasn't too hard. If it was, kind of look at it a little bit more. Once again, use the resources I supplied for this week, W3 Schools, Tutorials Point, and so on. There's quite a few of them I have out there that you can look at. Relate this to the programming you already know. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm not here to reteach you programming and what's a variable and so on. I'm here to sit back and say, this is how this language is going to use a variable. So you should already know those types of things. If you don't know them, go learn them. Go out and explore a little bit more on those resources I provided for you. All right, with that, I'll see you in the next video and we'll apply all this.